Hello everybody, my name is Tratnos, and in this video we're going to take a look at the first 4 bosses of the raid. Their dungeon journal, the kind of story with them, their mechanics, and by the way, this tier, I don't think I'm going to be here for any of the raid testing, so raid testing videos, you may have to go elsewhere this time around, unless they do some extra ones. I'll be back after those, but yeah, let's get started with the first boss. We've got the Plexus Sentinel, which has 2 models we can see here, the Attendant and the Warden itself. We'll read the mythic version of the Dungeon Journal, and I'll mention whenever there's mechanics that are specific to the higher difficulties, but want all the mechanics that we can get. So up first, we have Phase Blink, which is our first use of the Reshi Wraps. The Reshi Wraps are the legendary artifact cloak that we get this season, and using it is something that it ties into the mechanics in a lot of these fights. So for Phase Blink, using the Reshi Wraps causes the caster to enter an ethereal state of energy, bypassing the atomization process. So either just having them passively is going to stop us getting atomized, or we have to use it at some point to avoid getting atomized. Up next, we have the Arcanomatrix Sieve, which atomizes all players who come in contact with it. It deals a zillion arcane damage to players passing through. And it also, the boss sections off portions of the intake with radiation, which deals 2.5 million arcane damage every 1 second. So yeah, presumably the Phase Blink is what lets us bypass some or all of this damage. Then we also have Static Lightning. The Plexus Sentinel rains lightning down after activating the intake, dealing nature damage to players in some radius, a 0-yard radius right now, but this is a heroic mechanic, so maybe this is just swirlies that start on heroic or higher. Then in P1, we have Purge the Intruders, starting with Manifest Matrices. The Sentinel fires arcane energy into the players, doing arcane damage every second for 6 seconds. Upon expiration, a displacement matrix is created, so maybe you run out, maybe people get targeted by this and run out and drop matrices, or matrices somewhere. When activated, the displacement matrix stuns and inflicts 5.7 million arcane damage to all players within 8 yards, and leaves behind potent residue. Additionally, the activating player will be teleported to a random nearby location. The potent residue leaves behind a puddle, basically, that deals 5 million damage every 2 seconds and slows by 50%. So, yeah, maybe the matrices get dropped off by players running out with Manifest Matrix, and then if somebody accidentally walks near one, or maybe you intentionally walk near them, it stuns you, teleports you, and leaves behind this slowy, damagey zone. So we'll see if other mechanics interact with this. The tank mechanic is called Obliteration Arcano Cannon. This says Plexus Sentinel marks the current target to be exterminated, firing a bomb that deals 22 million arcane damage to all players, reduced based on distance from the explosion. This also leaves behind this potent residue, which is the same icky ground zone. Additionally, the primary target will take 100% damage from Obliteration Arcano Cannon. So 22 million arcane damage is, pop it defensive and you'll live as a tank. And then you, I guess, run this out away from the raid and also drop this puddle somewhere where stuff isn't too bad. The Powered Automaton, the chassis of the Sentinel, periodically emits charged lightning. Charged lightning energy arcs from the Sentinel, dealing nature damage and arcing between up to 5 players within 10 yards. So kind of like the shock bots on Muggsy, just zapping people and nearby people. Then we have Eradicating Salvo. This is the mythic mechanic, or at least a mythic twist on this mechanic. A targeted player is targeted to be purged, firing 2 missiles that each deal 5.6 million arcane damage split between all players hit, and knocking players away from the primary target. If it fails to hit at least 5 targets, or 5 players, it instead inflicts 11 million arcane damage to all players. So 2 missiles are going to come out, maybe from the different sides of the boss, and you're going to want to soak at least 5 people intercepting each of them. And yeah, I guess the mythic twist is just this needing to hit at least 5 people thing. That looks like the templating is not done yet here. Then in stage 2, we get Protocol Purge. The Plexus Sentinel relocates, activates the Sieve, teleporting all players away and creating a multitude of traps throughout the arena. The Arcanomatrix Sieve scans the arena, atomizing all foreign material, so if you don't have your cloak on, I guess this is maybe when you get killed. While channeling, the Sentinel gains a shield absorbing damage. Breaking this shield interrupts the Protocol Purge. We have Energy Cutter. Defensive measures create energy cutter beams throughout the room, inflicting arcane damage and an additional 5.6 million arcane damage every 5 seconds players come in contact with them. So not a lethal dot, but a very, very deadly one. Very, very close to lethal one. Like, this is a lot of damage to be taking. We're going to have Purging Lightning, which is a healer mechanic. Lightning from the Great Exhaust, or lighting, rather, from the Great Exhaust, is channeled through the Plexus Sentinel into intruders, dealing nature damage to players. Each cast empowers the Plexus Sentinel, increasing damage done by Purging Lightning by 25%. Okay, so I assume it is supposed to be lightning, and this just says lighting by mistake. Yeah, so this is just the reason you have to interrupt it. You have to, I guess, get back to the boss, avoiding these cutters, right? It's like one of those phases where it teleports you away, and then you have to make it back through all the traps in the room before this gets too nasty. The Expulsion Zone is zones throughout the room that running into them will knock you back and do some arcane damage. And then on Mythic, we also have the Overloading Attendants, which erupt in arcane energies, inflicting 14 million arcane damage to all players and increasing damage taken from energy overload by 100%. So 14 million arcane to all players is pretty one-shotty already, but if you have 2 of these go off, it looks like it's just going to turbo wipe you. So yeah, maybe just something you have to dodge entirely. Or maybe you're living the 14 million with raid cooldowns or something, and then you're just popping them one at a time to avoid this stacking up too much. But yeah, let's see exactly how that one works out. That is our first boss. Second boss is called Loom'ithar. Loom'ithar is a beast that has an exquisitely rare sensitivity to magical energies. And you can see it's like this is a redo of the, gosh, what was the ice spider? That's going to bother me if I don't go find it. Hang on. A redo of Senarth. Yeah, a similar model, I guess, to when Senarth is like going up the web there. Okay, so yeah, Loom'ithar, this hangy spider thingy. In phase 1, we have the Silkbound Beast. There's just pulsing arcane damage. A mythic tagged mechanic is arcane pylons around the room pump arcane energy into whatever they strike first for 25 seconds. So this might be one of those mechanics that, you know, shoots a beam at the boss and you have to soak. Yeah, and that looks like that's what it is. If a player is affected, they will take stacking arcane dot. Otherwise, the energy reaches the boss and spills out to deal damage to all players every second. So it's going to be one of those things where you have a beam that you need to soak before it gets to the boss, and you rotate people in and out of it so that it doesn't do too much damage. Lair Weaving says Loom'ithar weaves a collapsing ring of infused tangles. The ring inflicts 10.5 million nature damage to players that pass through it and roots them for 8 seconds. On heroic and mythic difficulties, they spawn with a woven ward, which prevents all damage until they are struck by Piercing Strand. Now, Piercing Strand is a tank mechanic that launches a heavily infused strand through the current target at high speed, dealing arcane damage to all players in a line and increasing damage taken from Piercing Strand by 100% for 10 seconds. So this is our tank swap, and also we need to shoot them through the infused tangles rings. There's another tank mechanic as well called Silk Blast, which is just instead of melee attacks, the boss blasts you with silk, which is, I guess, going to let you not be in melee range and have the boss not wipe you, because presumably this boss is rooted, and so usually when a boss is rooted, either it has a ranged auto attack or it wipes you if you're out of range. This one looks like just a ranged auto attack. Primal Spellstorm is a swirly, it looks like, a 6-yard swirly to dodge. Over Infusion Burst is arcane damage to all players for 8 seconds every second. Then it releases energy in a massive explosion, inflicting 28 million arcane damage to all players within 40 yards. So this is going to be like a run out type thing, right? The boss starts casting over Infusion Burst, everybody runs out 40 yards away, and you're stacking up and healing during it as well. Kind of like Bloodbound Horror, right? Where you run out when the boss is doing the big AoE, and then that one, though, does damage to everybody after it goes off, and you heal up kind of during and after it. This one, instead, you're going to heal up as you're running out, it looks like. Infusion Tether is another important mechanic here. Several players are pulled to Loom'ithar with a strand that deals damage and grows in strength every second. It snaps when drawn out to 40 yards, creating a splotch of living silk at the player's location. On heroic and mythic difficulties, it inflicts arcane damage to the target when it ends. And living silk is fresh tendrils of silk turn their victims into arcane conduits, dealing 3.5 million nature damage every second, increasing arcane damage taken by 500%, and reducing movement speed by 50%. So presumably you're going to have to be really careful with how how you break these to avoid getting killed by this. That's a large damage taken increase. Okay, then we have an intermission, Unraveling. At half health, Loom'ithar repels all players as it tears itself in two, freeing itself from its abdomen to take the fight to the players below. So I guess the boss is gonna like crawl out of the abdomen and then maybe be movable. The shockwave of Loom'ithar's landing deals physical damage and knocks back all players. For the remainder of the fight, Loom'ithar may move freely and takes 25% increased damage, while Arcane Ichor pours endlessly from its severed half above. Arcane Ichor deals damage every second to players it touches. So this is maybe the enrage here, right? The boss comes out of the abdomen and then lands, deals some damage, and then for the rest of the fight, it takes increased damage, so you can kill the boss a little bit faster from 50 to 0 than from 0 to 50, but also the abdomen is dripping this ichor that's maybe going to spread out from the middle of the room or from the side of the room until you run out of space. So in Phase 2, we have the Deathbound Beast. Again, we have pulsing healing damage. Again, we have swirlies to dodge. Again, we have a new one called Arcane Outrage. Loom'ithar unleashes Arcane Ichor and pure arcane energy with an enraged shriek, repelling and inflicting 1.2 million arcane damage to all players each second for the next 4 seconds. On Mythic difficulty, when it ends, players erupt with arcane energy, dealing arcane damage themselves and allies within 6 yards. And over-infusion liquid... Okay, this is the Arcane Ichor. So it creates Ichor. The boss is maybe gonna drop Ichor underneath itself, not just where the abdomen is, but where the actual moving spider is, perhaps. And then also, it's going to push you away and force you to spread at the end of the 4 seconds as you are kind of running, getting pushed away here. I can imagine this being quite hectic, especially towards the very end of the fight, if you have had a lot of the room denied by all of the Ichor created by the Unbound Rage and the Arcane Outrage over the fight. Then we have Writhing Wave. This is the tank mechanic. This is a frontal cone that deals 50 million nature damage and an additional 8 million nature damage every second for 25 seconds. Damage from both effects are split between all players hit. So you may wish to split this between your 2 tanks. However, on Heroic and Mythic difficulties, Writhing Wave causes targets to take increased damage from Writhing Wave's initial hit for its duration. So you'll be taking more damage the next time one gets cast if you do try and soak every single one with your 2 tanks. Now, on Mythic as well, if it fails to hit at least 5 targets, the Loom'ithar binds himself in excess energy to absorb damage taken. So instead, it looks like this is probably going to be one of those tank mechanics with a group 1 and a group 2. And you have your tank, one tank, hitting group 1 with the cone, and then the other tank taunts, and then the next time the cone starts casting, group 2 make sure to all get hit by it. That's probably going to be the way you handle this. Maybe you use some immunes on it. Maybe the last couple of ones, you just immune 4 people in a tank in, or even 5 immunes with a taunt. But that's probably a little bit fancy for a second boss strategy. You probably don't have to bother with that. Then we have Soulbinder Naazindhri. This is the 3rd boss. And we start off with some ads. The Soulbinder gathers her army in the arena. We have Assassins. The Unbound Soul begins wrapping process upon entering the arena and becomes an ethereal after they finish this process. So this is like a room where the Shadow Guard army is created by taking the souls and then binding them in the living silk. So that when they come in, they're just the souls, and then the silk gets wrapped up in them, and then once that process is finished, they turn into whatever they're going to be. In this case, we have Assassins. So the chrysalis here is the Unbound Soul coils its fading form in arcane living silk, desperate to hasten its rebirth as an ethereal. Each pulse of power is not its own, but a final act of devotion in service to Naazindhri. So I guess the soul enters the arena and then starts getting wrapped up, and then once it's done, maybe you can actually attack it and it can attack you. Maybe it's one of those things where it's like it's a cosmetic animation until that's finished. Once it does finish turning into the assassin, it's the Shadow Guard Assassin, which has a mythic mechanic called Voidblade Ambush. The assassin targets a random player, vanishing into the shadows, then reappearing behind them, and delivering a devastating strike infused with shadow energy, dealing 4.2 million shadow damage and an additional 700,000 shadow damage every 2 seconds for 1 minute to all players within the impact area. So presumably this will mark you, and then you'll need to make sure that nobody is on top of you or in front of you if it's going to shadow step behind you and then do like a frontal cone. and then only you have to deal with this, because this is not a bad amount of damage, but if it hits your whole raid, there's a nasty dot. We also have mages. So when they turn into mages, they instead get Void Volley. This is a cast that deals shatter damage to the player, and it leaves behind a dot. This one is interruptible, but the cast time halves each time the cast is interrupted. So if you interrupt it, it's going to start spamming these at you. So there are two ways that you could deal with this. One is you can late kick it and try and kill it before it starts machine gun casting you, right? Say this was a 10-second cast. You could kick at 9.5, and then 4.5, and then 2, and then 1. And so you can make almost 20 seconds. In fact, asymptotically approaching 20 seconds before that cast would start going through, right? If you late kicked it each time. But the downside of that is that if you're planning to kill it in 18 seconds and your DPS is bad and it's going to take you 24, and you realize it after you've kicked it down to a 1-second cast time, it's going to machine gun 6 casts at you. So what you could instead do is let the 10-second cast go off once and then just plan to kick the second one before it reaches the 10 seconds. And that would be, you'd only be using 1 kick instead of 5 or however many, and you'd also have a lot less risk of it going wrong if you don't have enough damage. Now, those are examples with a 10-second cast. This could, in fact, have a 4-second cast or something like that as well, in which case I think you'd probably want to kick it even less, and you just want to make sure you kill it. And you would basically only ever kick this thing if it was about to die, because otherwise you'd be making the cast way too fast. Then we have the Unbound Phase Blade. This one it's got Void Resonance. So every 5 seconds, it gains more power from Void, and amplifying Void damage by 10% to all players. Okay, a little bit of an ugly text box here right now. But yeah, basically, the longer you ignore these, the worse it's going to be. They also have Phase Blades. This sears the target, inflicting shatter damage. The power of Void that scatters after impact jumps between all players, again, also doing damage. So basically, this hits one person and then also hits the whole raid for that much, right, for a mil. And that's going to be, if you leave this thing alone for 20 seconds, it's going to have 40% more damage, which is at least the raid damage, and maybe also the primary target damage is going to be increased by that as well. So this is also a high priority to kill quickly. My guess with these is, I don't know exactly how spawning them is going to work. There might be different waves. It might be one of those things where it's like, okay, it starts off by making an assassin and 2 mages, and then it makes 2 mages and 2, shadow guards, phase blades, and then it makes 1 of each of them, and then it makes 2 of each of them, or something like that, right? And you're going to have to figure out how to handle different combinations of them, because there's definitely, all of them need to get dealt with. My guess is that you probably leave the assassins for last, because you just play around them by spreading, either pre-spreading or spreading when you get targeted, if you get a notification when you're targeted. I don't know if you do. And then probably mages are second prio, and first prio is just to get these phase blades dead before that raid damage starts to get too nasty. So, in addition to the ads, the boss itself has some mechanics. We have Essence Implosion, which is a healer alert. This is just a damage and then damage over time to all players whenever the boss casts this, so just something to heal. Silk Shield is a mythic mechanic. Soulbinder weaves strands of enchanted living silk around her, soul-binding machines, forming a resilient barrier that absorbs incoming damage. While active, the machines continue their binding work, siphoning bound souls and reshaping them into ethereals. When a shield is destroyed, the threads lash out violently. All players take some damage. So maybe you have to kill the machines that are making these ads, and they are shielded by a big absorb shield, and you have to decide which ones you want to break first. Maybe you don't want to break them all at the same time, although the amount of damage on this right now is pretty negligible, so that doesn't seem like it would matter too much. We have the Soulfray Annihilation here. The Soulbinder targets random players, unleashing a silk-bound orb, pulsing with arcane force, inflicting 11 million arcane damage to any player struck by the orb, so almost lethal damage. The orb tears through everything in its path, including machines. Any unbound soul caught outside its protective ward is overwhelmed, taking 15% increased damage for 20 seconds. So this is something that you're probably going to want to aim or even maybe drag or grip the mobs into, if grip works on them. But it's only 15% increased damage, which is a pretty tame damage amp. Maybe something you don't want to bother too much with. Doing a lot of work to get a 15% damage amp that's not the kind of number you would do a lot of work for, because, who cares? We have Mystic Lash here, which is the tank mechanic. The boss lashes out in fury, striking her primary target with a whip of searing arcane energy. inflicting 2.8 million arcane damage every 1 second for 5 seconds. The blow brands the victim, amplifying all incoming Mystic Lash damage they take by 20%, and physical damage by 8% for 45 seconds. So this looks like kind of a classic swap on 2 stacks type thing, probably, but we'll have to see. Arcane Expulsion is a mythic mechanic as well. The boss unleashes a devastating arcane shockwave, knocking all players back with explosive force, dealing 3.5 million arcane damage and additional arcane damage every second for 15 seconds to them. When players crash to the ground, strands of silk are shaken loose, forming lingering zones of volatile energy that deal 1.4 million damage to all players inside every second. So this is going to knock us up, and then where we land, it's going to make void zones that we'll have to move out of. So, and then also this does a lot of damage up front as well. We have Soulfire Convergence. The Soulbinder targets random players, sending violent arcane shocks coursing through their souls. Afflicted players suffer 2.8 million arcane damage every second. As the torment escalates, unstable soul-rend orbs are violently expelled from the host's body. Any player struck by one reduces movement speed by 30 and haste by 25%. On mythic difficulties, the soul-rend orbs break the silk shields. Okay, so the shields aren't, it's not an absorb shield that you deal damage to yourself, it's an absorb shield that you need to break using these soul-rend orbs, which you don't want to hit players with since it slows them and slows their haste. We also have Death Spindle. This is another healer alert one, which is just a arcane damage every 2 seconds to the entire raid. And then the last one in this video is the 4th boss, which is Forgeweaver Araz. This is a voidy arcane thing here. And the lore here is, using powerful sigils and techno spells, Forgeweaver Araz controls the flow of energy from the Forge into Dimensius, feeding the Void Lords to bring him into our plane. An ardent follower of the All-Devouring, he strives to see his work through at all costs. Overwhelming Power is a tank mechanic, which is a stacking dot. You're going to want to swap before that dot kills you. Arcane Obliteration is a heroic mechanic that infuses his current target, doing 14 million arcane damage to all players, reduced by the number of players within 10 yards of the impact location. Additionally, an echo is summoned at the location. Players within 10 yards of the impact also take a healing absorb and suffer astral mark. So this is something that you want to soak, and you want to soak with enough players that it's not too deadly. But also, if everybody soaks it, everybody's going to get the full healing absorb. If you can soak with half your raid and they'll all live, you have less healing absorb to do because it's a smaller, like only half the raid gets the same healing absorb, because the healing absorb isn't split among players. It's just for each player. Now also, if you take one of these, you can't diminish the damage of the next one. You can still soak it and take extra damage if you want, and take the healing absorb. But this is one of those mechanics where, gosh, they've done this before, and it's one of those ones, yeah, where you definitely want 2 groups rotating between this, is the TLDR, Group 1 and a Group 2. But you can have your tanks in both groups, and it doesn't matter, for instance. They just won't reduce the damage of the second one, but they also, it's not going to scare them too much if it would be annoying to run out of, for instance. Now, the Arcane Echo that's created by this duplicates the casts of the boss. When the Forgeweaver and his Echoes are within 20 yards of each other, their damage done increases by 75%, and they get a 90% damage reduction, so don't do that. Then the Echo invokes a Collector to begin its prime sequence on Echoing Invocation. An Echoing Tempest rains arcane blasts at player destinations every second for 3 seconds, dealing arcane damage to players within 3 yards and pacifying them for 6 seconds. So this is maybe going to be something as well that predicts your movement if it's at player destinations. So you'd need to be running and then zigzagging as this is coming out. If that's true, that could be pretty fun. Then we have Silencing Tempest, which is a boss mechanic. This has the same wording as Echoing Tempest, so presumably when the boss casts this, any echoes that are still alive will also cast Echoing Tempest. Arcane Expulsion deals arcane damage to all players and knocks them back whenever he begins a ritual. Invoke Collectors invokes one of the collectors to begin harvesting. Collectors have a 99% damage reduction some or all of the time. They have Prime Sequence, which is they activate, unleashing waves of damage that deal 12 million arcane damage to players they hit, so dodge those, I guess. Then we have Arcane Siphon, which just does damage to all players every 2 seconds. And Astral Harvest. This is a mythic mechanic. The caster infuses a player with energy, dealing arcane damage every second for 4 seconds. Afterwards, an arcane manifestation is summoned at the player's location. This moves towards the collector that summoned it, so whoever's being harvested presumably runs far away from the collector, and then you kill the manifestation before it reaches the collector. The collector surges with manifested energy, dealing arcane damage on impact, followed by arcane damage every 2 seconds to all players for 16 seconds. And manifestations that connect with the Forgeweaver become empowered, granting them immunity to crowd control, and increasing their movement speed by 99%. So, yeah, I guess that's definitely very bad if you let that happen. We have an intermission called Priming the Forge. The Forgeweaver funnels energy into the Mana Forge to feed Dimensius. There's some stacking radiation damage from the Forge. There's also, if you stand inside the Iris, it's going to kill you rapidly, so don't do that. Basically, the boss is going to channel a laser of energy, I guess, at Dimensius, which is the last boss, and you're going to want to not be inside that energy, or else you'll get vaporized. Then we have Arcane Collectors. The Collectors fire energy in the direction of players, inflicting arcane damage to any player struck, and it leaves behind a dot as well. It's not a one-shot, but it's a nasty initial hit and dot. Energy from the Collectors feeds the Mana Forge. When enough energy is fed, the Mana Forge surges, inflicting damage to players. And if you destroy a Collector, it causes a breach, dealing arcane damage every 3 seconds to players. Ooh, nasty. So I guess you do want to kill these, but also killing them is going to do a lot of damage to everybody. We've Shielded Attendants, which are resilient attendants that are tank mobs. They're able to operate within the volatile environment of the Mana Forge by repelling arcane energy. So they have a shell that absorbs some damage, and with each consecutive attack against the same target, their attack speed increases. So I guess that's a tank swap mechanic. And then finally, the Forgeweaver's armor cracks, stunning him and splintering his form, increasing all damage taken by 100% for 12 seconds. So, yeah, maybe that's after you kill all the collectors, or maybe this is just a nasty phase where all this stuff is going on, but you can blast the boss for a bunch of damage. I'm not sure. We do then have the Iris opening. Forgeweaver Araz pushes the Forge beyond its limits to complete his ritual. So here we get the Unstable Surge, the Mana Forge becoming unstable, and dealing damage to players within 3 yards of impact, and applying stacks of Astral Burn to players, which is a dot. This looks like a swirly that you're going to dodge. Once the Forge becomes unstable, it's going to start shooting swirlies at you. Then we have the Focusing Iris still going on. Again, still don't stand in that. We have the Arcane Collectors with the same mechanics, the Shielded Attendants with the same mechanics, and again, the Forgeweaver's armor being splintered. Then in Stage 2, the Forgeweaver unleashes all his power as he feeds himself to Dimensius, opening a door to the void itself. We have Dark Singularity. A singularity erupts within the Forge, inflicting shadow damage every second to players and pulling them into its crushing darkness. Over time, the strength of this movement force increases. If you stand inside the black hole, you die, so don't do that. And then also, we have the Singularity infuses a player with Void, dealing 3.5 million shadow damage every second for 4 seconds. Afterwards, a Void manifestation is summoned at their destination. That walks towards the black hole, and if it makes it to the black hole, things are bad. So it's the same mechanic as with the attendants earlier. Somebody is going to get marked. They're going to have 4 seconds where they're taking a lot of damage to get as far away as possible from the black hole. Maybe you'll use rescues or life grips to do this, and then they will spawn a manifestation that you need to presumably kill before it reaches the black hole. The tank mechanic here is Overwhelming Power. Same thing, I think, as in Phase 1. It's just a dot that stacks. And then we still have Silencing Tempest, which is swirlies, and Death Throws. By the way, there's been a few mechanics that have used player destinations as the text here, which makes me think it's a little bit less likely that it's like it means anything about them predictively targeting you, and more that that's just whoever wrote the dungeon journal for this boss liked using the words player destinations, and it just means at where players are, not where they're going. Then we have Death Throws, which is a mythic mechanic thing. The Forgeweaver erupts as their form is torn apart, dealing arcane damage to all players and knocking them back. So yeah, it looks like this is one of those bosses where as things go on, the boss is getting more and more desperate, more and more voids infused, and the ritual is, getting overclocked to power up Dimensius, before we kill the boss. So that seems fun. Seems like a pretty fun fight. I'll have another video in the next couple of days with the next 3 bosses, and then I'll have Dimensius is going to have his own video all by himself, because a lot of mechanics there. Hope you've enjoyed. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.